Hi guys, welcome to today's session. We're going to be starting a different project today, which is going to be a sort of a study of a portrait bust, which is a fairly sort of traditional learning sort of task that you would get given in classical drawing schools. So I've got a bust here from the Met Museum collection, which is a really good resource. I'll put a link to the Met Museum's sort of search for their collections, and also a direct link for this particular image that I'm working from, which, as I say, is this bust of Caracalla. It's quite a nice cast. A lot of classical sculpture that you typically study is quite sort of unexpressive, and this has quite a nice kind of fairly severe expression that he's got on his face, which is always quite interesting, I think, to try to get into expressions with your artworks. There's also some interesting textures running through this one, so parts of the cast are broken, which we'll be going for near the end of the process. But initially we're going to be sort of approaching it more like a traditional portrait drawing in terms of how we get started. So I'm just going to be I've got paper here, which is a Fabriano paper that I'm working on, and then I'm using some soft nitrum, which is this sort of the softest nitrum charcoal that they make, which you can usually find in art stores kind of worldwide. I'm going to be moving to harder charcoals as we progress through the drawing, but initially we're just going to be kind of lightly sketching in the shapes using this very soft, unsharpened. Actually, I'm not going to bother sharpening it for this beginning of the drawing. I'm going to be working lightly so it's easy to erase, and we'll be working over it a lot heavier as the drawing progresses. So it's super simple. It's just the charcoal and a Kneadable eraser, which I always have. Probably won't be erasing tons today because we're just kind of sketching in a drawing board if you like to work on. You can always work on a table, but otherwise that's it, and your reference image, of course. So to get started, what I'm going to do is just try to block out the rough rectangle that makes up the overall height of this cast down to the bottom of that broken bit of neck, and the overall width. I'm going to be drawing it a bit bigger than my reference, so I'm scaling it up. If you want it to be a bit simpler, you can always draw at the exact same size as your reference when you're working. So I'm going to try to get it into the center of your view. Pop a mark up the top there, and another mark down the bottom. And then sort of two sides for it, so creating a kind of invisible sort of rectangle around. And you can see it's quite light, so if I need to erase it, that erases off pretty simply. And from there, I now want to kind of figure out the rough kind of rectangle box of the head within that overall height, because we need this kind of little extra space for the section of neck. And I can quite quickly, I'm going to be working quickly through this piece. I'm not kind of trying to avoid kind of slaving too much over specific measurements. With this piece, I want you to kind of be fairly expressive. I've got some more kind of really laboured over drawing exercises in the rest of the catalogue for OCAD that you can look through on our YouTube. On the website, but for this one we're going for a slightly more kind of sort of loose sketchy start with it and see how we go with that. So when you're a bit more kind of more confident with your drawing, you can start to approach things a little bit more loosely like this. Putting a note in there for the ears on either side. And just going to lift the top of the head up, I think, could do with being a little bit taller by the looks of it. So you can see I've been nice and loose, so it's easy to erase what I already had. So I'm still using simple lines. I'm working quickly, but keeping everything fairly simplistic initially. So we've got a sort of box in version of the whole head now, which is what we're after. And we can start to sort of now look for where that brow is. We've got his kind of grumpy looking brow across above the tops of the ears, and then kind of just above the ears we've got the bottom of the nose. A little bit of a width in for the overall width of that nose. And then he's got quite a small mouth kind of sitting within his jaw there. Quite a short top lip as well, so just make a little mark across there for the center of his mouth. And at this point I'm going to start just suggesting some of the shadows that make up the drawing. So you should be aware of the idea of shadows, having done a few of the other lessons. I've got some simpler lessons as well that you can look through in the catalogue that talk about shadows. But basically anywhere that the light doesn't directly hit, we've got a single light source with this. This subject. So there's a lot more shadow running down the right hand side of his face here, because the light's kind of streaming in from the left hand side. And there's a little bit down this jawline on the left as well, actually, just kind of creeping up here. Can just about sort of make out too. But the left hand side of his neck is more illuminated. I'm starting to now sort of adjust and elaborate these shadows slightly. Make them smaller where they need to go smaller, add a little bit more detail here and there. Also need this shadow that comes in underneath his chin. It's quite a strong shadow actually down there. Sort of an almost trapezoidal shape. So getting to not a bad level of detail for this first stage. Which is good. It's blocked in. I mean, I think it's probably about 12 minutes or so it's taken to block this in. Just working with really simple shapes, kind of doing stuff progressively. Just gonna slide this across a bit to wedge it in a little bit more. I've not really fleshed out many of the details, so things I would say like the eyes to me feel like they maybe will end up needing to be possibly a bit bigger in the shape, the sort of specific shape of the eyes. And I've got a little bit, certainly on this side, it looks like I've got a bit of scope to kind of push the eyelid a little bit higher and make this shadow, so thinking about the shadow shape, the shadow of the brow, cut in a bit more. Yeah, that's a bit better. So you can see, in terms of character, that little change made quite a big difference. So those little sort of tweaks, that's what we're after at this stage. So fairly happy, I think, generally with these shapes and features in the face at the moment. Certainly before the next stage. The next stage we'll be starting to refine stuff. Yeah, sorry, I trailed off a little bit there. So I'm just finishing these last bits of the features. And I now just want to go down this kind of right-hand contour of the face. So just a little bit more sort of this ear that I mentioned briefly right at the beginning. Placing that in. And then just the swing back for the neck, I think, as well. A little bit of this jawline. How the neck swings out. A little bit of this light shape. So there's a tiny bit of light shape there that catches on the right hand neck. And I'll also just place in a suggestion for where his shadow of the cast is sort of underneath. Like that. So yeah, I think pretty much for what we're going for today, that's looking pretty good. I'm ready to do a lot more. Next week, I think. Yeah, so that's it for today. So you're working with a soft willow charcoal. If you can, you want to use nitrum, which is a really nice charcoal to work with. Any kind of paper is fine. This is a reasonably nice Fabriano paper, but you can work in anything. Generally, the more expensive the paper up to a point, the easier it'll be to work with charcoal, or at least to kind of work repetitively. But you can use anything that you happen to have kind of available to you. Will be absolutely fine. So yeah, just soft charcoal, kneadable eraser, some paper, and a reference. So I'm going to put a link to this particular bust that I'm working on in the Met Museum collection, and then generally you can just kind of explore through it as well and see. You could use work from a different cast, anything you like. Any kind of sculpture really works. It doesn't have to be a portrait, but kind of combines a cast drawing and a portrait. How we kind of approach a portrait as well, working from this bust, so sort of kills two birds with one stone. But yeah, that's it for today. As always, you can subscribe to our YouTube for content from myself, other tutors, and interviews with students and artists and professionals in the industry, various industries. And you can also click the link through if you want to find out what sorts of courses and qualifications OCAD offers, if you want to do something a bit more formal and get direct feedback from our tutors. So yeah, that's it, and I'll see you guys next week.